forcibly is punishment.
Or you're
Death.
JR, you're usually the prime suspect for echoing problems.
bonus time though.
Could you explain what you mean by socially based slavery?
Well, I would say, I don't know that it was socially based. What I mean is that the Hebrew people were taxed very heavily and ruled with an iron thumb by the Romans. And this caused poverty. This caused poverty amongst the Hebrew people. And there were many people who became homeless because of it, impoverished. And in order to survive, many people indentured themselves willingly as slaves to those who had money, had businesses, as a way of survival. They provided them food, shelter, and a means of getting by, a means to survive. So many of the people were slaves in Israel at the time. Amongst the Hebrew people were self-indentured for the purpose of escaping poverty.
The same is true of Roman society, and both societies took slaves in warfare.
Well, I would say there's a fundamental difference, really, because again, Rome was one of the most, if not the most brutal. Well, I don't know that it was the most, but certainly was one of the most brutal societies in history. The Roman slavery was definitely different from that of Hebrew slavery. Again, the majority of Hebrew slaves were self-indentured because, as a means to escape poverty. That wouldn't be so with Rome.
Have you read what Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy have to say about taking slaves, Neph?
Yes, the Bible tells us that capturing a man and forcing him to be a slave is a crime worthy of death. Have you read that?
I don't think so. The Bible that I've read says that actually you are to go out and take slaves from other nations, and that is perfectly acceptable.
That's not the same as capturing a man off the street. That's enslaving people who were in warfare, and this is common practice around the world. It doesn't mean that it was something that God dictated. It means that it means.
I seem to recall this is the word of God, actually, but
it doesn't mean that that Christianity condones slavery specifically. What it means is that slavery is a way of overcoming and subduing your
You know, now if I could almost mount a defense for you here, or even for biblical slavery, if with admittedly a lot of acrobatics in my view, but there's one thing in there that I personally haven't seen anyone be able to get past, and that's sort of the part where it says, you know, you are allowed to beat your slave to death, just make sure he doesn't live for a day and then die, because then you're in trouble. But if he dies immediately,
excuse me.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was that it was okay to beat your slave, just not to death. But if he dies after a couple of days, then it's okay. Am I wrong?
And if you beat him until his eye falls, until he loses a vision in an eye, or you beat him till one of his teeth falls out, then you have to let him go.
Yeah. Well,
because that's clearly taking it too far, and that is the word of God.
If society breaks down,
they differentiate between how a Jewish slave was treated as opposed to a non-Judaic slave in the Hebrew Testament.
That's also true.
And there is this other thing that if you get a slave and you give the slave a wife and they have a child together, and one of your slaves comes up to his 7-year, so tenure or whatever, and he gets the choice. He can either go out free and leave his wife and child, or he can swear fealty to his master forever and stay with his wife and child, and then you have to drive the sort of all through his ear.
That was his choice, not the slave owner's choice.
Can't they settle it with a handshake instead of the all through the ear?
Yeah.
Furthermore, the slaves that you're referring to, where it describes beating, these are not captured peoples. These are people who self-indentured themselves or were indentured to someone to repay a debt by law, by the courts of Israel.
But Neff, do you really think that this is the best way of resolving conflicts by driving awls through people's ears?
Let me finish, please. This would mean someone is angst against the law. It means they're breaking the law by refusing to provide the service they agreed to in the courtroom. And also, furthermore, this was a far cry from imprisonment. I don't know about you, but personally,
Neff, if I break the law by double parking, they don't beat me.
If you can't allow me to have my say, and I'm not trying to consume the mic, I've been quiet for 5 minutes since you called me, just about quiet. You're the one who always goes on about not overlimiting the conversation. Again, this is, I don't know about you, but I personally would rather work for someone who has money, be provided with a home and shelter and the freedom to go into town and have friends and spend an evening drinking wine with people as I choose, so long as I'm home when I needed to be and did my work and got my work done. I would rather live that way than be locked up in a rotten cell and eating roaches to get enough protein for 6 years. So what you call something that is a terrible situation really was quite beneficial for the person who was convicted of the death and forced to work it off for a period of 6 years, and then they're free to go, by the way. Then a far cry better than someone existing in a rotting jail cell of the day, which was horrific conditions and the food was appalling. So it's a far cry from it sure is a mild form of justice.
Where do you get this description of life during that period from?
Well, I mean, goodness, do you really believe that jail cells in the time of Christ were...
it's not the question that was asked, Neff.
I studied Latin in school, and descriptions of
well, the Bible talks about
life and jail, and not to mention studying that period.
Well, the apostles Paul and Barnabas were imprisoned in a Roman cell, and their feet were put in stocks. That's a heck of a way to exist, isn't it? Laying on a cold stone floor, dirt floor, with your feet in stocks.
Yeah, but you have an entire attitude about how the whole system worked. And
well, I think it's quite obvious and common sense, don't you, that jail cells are...
No, I actually don't. It turns out that a lot of what we thought about, for example, in society is...
System.
I'm talking about both overall.
Well,
I'm talking about just in general, you seem to have a strange attitude. For example,
no,
when you became a slave, that was a decree by court. You didn't necessarily choose to do it by choice.
I was talking about...
There's a reason they got rid of generational debt. It was a horrible thing. It destroyed many a family.
Well, you're talking about
carry on
something
to death from father to son anymore.
I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about the quality of jail.
You mentioned it at one point.
No, I told you that that form of legal dispensation is far better than being jailed.
Well, but does it make it justified? You know what I mean? Does it make it ethical?
It's not justifiable to force someone to work off a debt. Judges do this all the time today, do they not?
Yeah, but Neff, they don't beat them if they don't do it.
Well, then if the slave owner didn't discipline them, what would happen to them, perhaps?
There are alternatives. Neff, if I double park, I don't get beaten. And people don't drive awls through my ear because these are stupid ways of doing things.
Okay.
So
there is what you might call soft power in the world, right? There are alternatives other than beating people.
May I take